name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In June, we remember one of the greatest missionaries of the Christian church since St. Paul, perhaps second only to St. Paul. And I don't know if you know, but he came from Devon. He was born in Crediton. His name was St. Boniface, born in 675. He became a Benedictine monk, and he spent his life traveling and evangelizing pagan Germany. So he dared to go where the Roman legions feared to go. They withdrew after a terrible battle, Teutonberg, where they lost 20,000 men. And so they withdrew the other side of the Rhine from Germany, Germania. And they didn't dare go back. But Boniface went there in the 7th century. He went to evangelize pagan Germany. One day, the story is that he heard human sacrifice was still being practiced in a village called Geismar. During the winter, the villagers would sacrifice a child to the god Thor, the mighty Thor, under a great oak tree that was sacred to Thor, the thunder oak. And pagans said that if you touched the oak, you would die, because it was sacred to Thor. But the story goes that Boniface and his companions, when they heard that they were preparing to sacrifice a child again, they rushed to the site, to Geismar, and they arrived at the tree just when the ritual had begun, and they were able to save that child. And Boniface shouted, "Here's the thunder oak, and here the cross of Christ shall break the hammer of the false god Thor." And Boniface seized an axe, and he felled that mighty tree, this great oak, on his own, because a mighty rushing wind surged through the forest, and as he chopped at the tree, it caught the branches, and the tree was felled. The tree collapsed, and the pagan Germans were astounded, and they converted and were baptized. And St. Boniface's cutting down of that sacred oak has become a symbol for many Christians today. They take what they call the Boniface option. They take that moment where he cut down the sacred oak as a symbol of the way we should act as Christians in our culture. A culture that they describe as a dystopia, where truth is suppressed and lies are endorsed. Every day, they say, we face pressure to become more isolated and lonely and more compliant and submissive to what they tell us through our screens. And we should resist, they say, in the name of Christ. So a young woman called Isabel Vaughan Spruce was arrested recently for praying silently near an abortion clinic. She wasn't holding up a placard. She wasn't approaching people coming to get abortions in that clinic. She was just standing there, not even particularly close. But the police arrested her under a public space protection order. But the charges against her were dropped. They lost the case against her after a public outcry. People were shocked. Can you be arrested now for praying as a Christian? And people took her as, a heroine, an inspiration to be bold and proactive in evangelizing our secular culture, witnessing against our secular culture, and casting down the objects of our culture's idolatry instead of being passive or accommodating. And if you want to know what idols we worship now, what do we sacrifice children to? That's what they used to do in antiquity. It's in the Bible. The Phoenicians, the Canaanites used to sacrifice children to Baal. The Germans would sacrifice children to Thor. What do we sacrifice children to? Maybe the God's freedom and autonomy. We're still sacrificing children. That's come back after the end of Christendom. Maybe the church should come first in our lives, and we should stand firm against what's been called a culture of death, which this government seems to stand for and endorse. We should actively protest against things that are happening. Assisted dying, where vulnerable people feel there's a burden and a doctor offers you suicide. That's new. That's going to change the relationship with the National Health Service of vulnerable people. Or people with disabilities whose benefits have been taken away, some of whom commit suicide because of that. They don't want you to hear about that. Vulnerable people being punished. Winter fuel payments are being taken away. Endorsing death. Stella Creasy in the House of Commons, the day before this was recorded, advocating for the change in legislation to legalize abortion up till birth. That's what happens in America, where children are born and the doctors aren't allowed to resuscitate the child or care for it if the abortion goes wrong and the child is born alive, because that's what can happen if you allow abortion up to birth. They let the child die. That's what's coming, it seems. That's what Stella Creasy wants, who's the MP for Walthamstow, not far away. Maybe we should protest together about that and things like that. The coming of what Pope John Paul II called a culture of death. Because we stand here in the church for a culture of life, for the vulnerable, for the disabled, for the unborn, for those who might feel their lives are a burden. We say to them, that's what it is to be loved, to be a burden on someone. That's okay. If they love you, they accept that burden. To love someone is to accept that burden. In a culture of life, we affirm that. So maybe we should start thinking about how we protest together, how we use our vote, how we use our power as consumers, and take St. Boniface's defiance of the pagans as our model. Confront our culture, speak the truth about it, present Christ to it. We're supposed to be confident disciples, according to the London plan. Let's be confident disciples. Let's be unapologetic. Let's be forthright. May St. Boniface be our model, inspiring us courage and trust, what we need to live for Christ in a hostile culture. St. Boniface ended his life as a martyr. The word martyr means witness. We think of martyrs as people who die for their faith. He was killed by pagans he was trying to convert. But all Christians are called to be witnesses to Christ. And that's what the word martyr really means, witness. Are you a witness to Christ? How? St. Boniface dared to cut down the thunder oak. Let's each one of us in this church dare to speak of Christ and dare to stand up for what we believe.